Amir Adnani, thanks so much for joining us at Wall Street Unplugged.
Frank, is this the first time I'm connecting with you on video?
I know. I don't know if that's a good thing. That means people are gonna. It's good for you. People get to see you. You're a better looking guy than me. Unfortunately, they got to see me. So
It's amazing. I think people. One of the benefits of COVID-19 is I guess we've all become a lot more crafty with making videos and look at this. Look at us connecting this way instead of the good old fashioned way of audio only. So here's here's to getting stronger despite adversity.
I hear you. I hear you. So if all you guys listen on YouTube, on iTunes right now, be sure to go to YouTube and you'll be able to see this. But because they're only going to get the audio version. But let's. I wanted to have you on because you're one of the smartest guys that I know when it comes to uranium. Founder, president, CEO co-founder of UEC Uranium Energy, and getting tons of questions. Right, we've seen uranium prices come up, a lot of production cuts, and it's exciting a lot of people, especially my subscribers, my listeners, because a lot of them are in uranium, have uranium exposure. Why don't we talk about the industry? Because we've seen a couple of head fakes before. Is this a head fake or is this for real now?
It's a good question, and it's been a long bear market since 2011 with Fukushima. We have had a number of head fakes, as you point out. Look, it does feel like this time around there are at least some different elements. Okay, and so let's talk about the elements at work. I think honestly the most important element. I mean, I think it's a question of whether you're going to look at the tree or the forest. If you just zoom in, you might conclude that the big issue here is what has happened with COVID-19 in terms of a black swan event, a supply side disruption that no one projected, no one saw coming. And now, due to COVID-19, mine shutdowns because of health and safety reasons, especially mines that are in remote areas or fly in, fly out operations like Cameco, Cigar Lake, or some of the operations in Kazakhstan, almost just over 50% of global production is offline right now. On a monthly basis, that works out to be, just about 12 million pounds of production. That's a lot when you consider annual production was supposed to be about 140 million pounds. So you have this catalyst near term that's caused the uranium price to go up 35%, making it the best performing commodity so far this year. But if you kind of step back and consider the picture that we had coming into this year, I think it's very important. Production of uranium kind of topped at around in 2016 is where it topped out in retrospect. And from there is when we started to see more determined supply side discipline from producers by shutting down mines, curtailing production. Again, big names like Cameco, Orano, Kazatomprom. Starting in 2017, in 2018, you had the world's biggest uranium mine, McArthur River, which was shut down. I've been on your show talking about all of this. So you've had a very focused and determined supply side discipline set in for 3 years now. And so the market was already rebalancing. And I think that was the catalyst, was this rebalancing that was taking a number of years to kind of take shape. And it feels like this has now become the tipping point with COVID that's pushed it into finally some upward momentum. I mean, we haven't seen a uranium price with a 3 in front of it at 34 in 4 years. So it's a 4-year high for the uranium price. But look, nothing changes sentiment better than price. And I think right now, this time around, we have some really important fundamental underpinning to the whole equation. Demand for uranium is expected to be just over 180 million pounds this year. Supply from production was expected to be just over 140 million pounds this year. But every month that goes by where 12 million pounds is offline, that's going to start to create a structural deficit potentially. And sorry, the 12 million pounds is global production on a monthly basis. So if we lose half of that, so say 6 million pounds per month, and again, every month that goes by, that's production that we're not getting back. That's production that's not going to be made up at some point in the future. And so I think we're starting to, Frank, coming back to your question, is this a head fake? I really feel like it's different this time around. I really do believe fundamentally it's being driven by issues that give it more leg and make it very different than any of the previous sort of rallies we've seen or attempted rallies we've seen in the uranium market.
So, I mean, talk about the consumption end, because when it comes to electricity, you're seeing supply come off the market, but what about consumption? Have you seen the latest figures when it comes to electricity? Because when I look at my personal expense for electricity, it's up by 30-40% because we're home all the time, right? So, but yet businesses are closed. Are we still seeing that? Because that's going to be a big factor, I think. And again, I think we all believe this is going to come back online. It could take the end of this year before everything's back online, or maybe a little bit longer. But I'm just curious, have you seen the consumption numbers? Because if they're still that strong and you're seeing that much demand come online, it seems like, this move in prices is going to continue this momentum higher.
So far, let's address what you just said, which is important. I mean, clearly, there's going to be less demand for electricity globally, just because we need less of it. Everyone's sitting at home. There's less industrial activity, so on and so forth. However, I think what we've seen so far is that utilities have managed to cut down or reduce electricity generation from other sources than nuclear power. When you think about the way that nuclear energy generates electricity, which is base load, and the cost associated with shutting down a nuclear power plant, and the fact that the transportation of uranium, it takes very little uranium to generate the kind of energy that a nuclear power plant needs. So you might actually have difficulty in a COVID-19 world to move a lot of coal around. So you've seen reports out of Japan that coal-fired power plant might be shut down. They're easier to bring down and turn on, especially gas-fired plants as well. With nuclear power, this is your base load. It's frankly too costly to shut them down. And so we haven't really seen a shutdown. And once the nuclear power plant does a reload, means new fuel is inserted in, it can run continuously without interruption for 12 to 15 months. And so depending on where any reactor's kind of reload was, so far we've seen demand be pretty steady. And so to come back to your question, while there is going to be a drop in global electricity consumption, there hasn't yet been a decline or drop in nuclear power generation to generate electricity. Hence, demand for uranium, we can assume, has more or less remained unchanged. Now, let's not lose sight of the fact that 47 new reactors have been added to the grid globally in the last 7 years. There's 54 reactors under construction globally. And so there also is this element of growth with the demand side of the equation. But again, if we discount all of that and just look at the steady rate of what is online and consuming over 400 reactors globally, the demand side looks more stable than the supply side with a lot of the mine disruptions. And mine disruptions, again, are also not unique to uranium mining only. There have been, since COVID-19 really kind of took hold of safety issues for mining operators, all commodities from gold and copper down to uranium have been impacted by this. I think as of latest count, there was over 350 mines affected. Roughly 25 have come back online, but more or less you're talking about a few hundred mines that are still impacted by this, where for safety reasons, or again, the fact that these mines typically happen to be in remote areas where you're going to have less infrastructure available in terms of health, hospitals, ability to look after people. Mines typically aren't situated in the middle of a downtown of a major city, right? So the remote nature of mining, I think, also makes it more of a concern when it comes to managing a pandemic that where the virus at hand is one that spreads very easily.
Well, really quick, I know this is an easy question for you and me, but we have a lot of investors maybe getting into uranium for the first time. Talk about what baseload power means really quick, because it's a big factor. Because I could see people who never invest in uranium saying, well, alternative energy, wind, solar, well, everything's going on. Just really quick to bring everyone involved, because sometimes we just take things for granted that everybody knows what that means.
It basically is about capacity factor, which is about what percentage of a 24-hour day does that source of energy work. So, for example, we think we all understand there's 24 hours in a day, right? And in the 24 hours, nuclear power has the capability to generate power continuously without interruption almost 95% of the 24 hours. Renewables are somewhere between 20 to 30% of the 24-hour cycle. And coal and gas end up somewhere in the middle in there. So it's the capacity factor that nuclear power has, the ability to work almost all the time, that makes it baseload. So whether the wind blows, whether the sun shines or not, whether you've got coal that can arrive safely at your plant or gas that can arrive, nuclear can just keep going and basically be the backbone. That's another way of thinking about what baseload means. And so ultimately, and the amount of fuel that it takes. I mean, if you think about all the uranium that is needed in the whole world to run all the reactors that are working in the world, it can fit inside of one coal vessel. And so the amount of uranium that is needed is very little compared to how much energy it can generate. So it really is the most energy dense of all commodities. It really is a powerful element, uranium, that can generate the kind of energy that it does. All those, again, contribute back to the baseload quality that it has. Finally, let's not forget, it can generate electricity around the clock without any CO2 emissions. So one of the reasons it's definitely gaining some pointers and scores with climate scientists and people and organizations that are concerned about climate change related issues is that they recognize here's a source of power that has the ability to generate enormous amounts of energy, but without emitting any CO2. And that's actually one of the reasons, Frank, we've noticed in the last couple of years, nuclear energy has become a bipartisan issue in Washington, D.C., which is quite remarkable because you think about how polarized American politics has become, how polarized it is, disagreements between the Democrats and Republicans on anything. And on nuclear energy, there's growing bipartisan support. In fact, one of the only bills that Trump has signed during his presidency that really got no fanfare because of that bipartisan support was something called the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act to help streamline the permitting and licensing for new nuclear power plants. Quite amazing, and didn't get any press. I guess it doesn't get media coverage if it's not hotly debated and people don't want to rip each other's heads off. But it's quite interesting in that sense.
No, and thanks so much for explaining that. I know people who are invested in uranium, they understand this, but again, this is a great industry. This is one of the sectors that's really working right now. Yes, the market has come back, but no one's really talking about uranium and this bull market and prices going up so much. And now let's get into you mentioned regulation, the Department of Energy recent decision, domestic supply, where the government's going to buy. Talk about that and its impact to your company, UEC, because I know it's very, very good news on your front.
Well, one of the things that this news represents. So we're talking about an announcement that came out of the Department of Energy just recently, which is a set of recommendations, basically being made after a very extensive period of reviewing the nuclear energy and uranium mining capabilities in America. This was reviewed by a number of different departments of government, cabinet level secretaries, and you're talking about Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Department of Interior, the Pentagon, and the recommendations basically draw a number of conclusions and recommendations. So the conclusion it draws is that, hey, we've lost the leadership role that we had in America globally when it comes to nuclear energy, and we've lost our capability to produce uranium domestically to meet our own needs, both for power generation and that to power aircraft carriers and submarines, the nuclear navy. And part of this now becomes a national security issue, becomes an energy security issue, because the nuclear business, nuclear energy, uranium mining has become almost dominated globally by state-owned companies. And so the report basically says, we got to regain this lost leadership. We got to get it back. And so let's make a number of recommendations to get about doing this. Frank, I've been involved in the uranium business as an entrepreneur who founded Uranium Energy 15 years ago. As the CEO running this company for 15 years, I can tell you in my 15 years, I've never seen such a policy document from not just the US government, from any government. And individuals that work with me at my company, the chairman of our company, Spencer Abraham, who's a former U.S. Energy Secretary, Scott Melby, who's a 35-year veteran of the uranium mining business, they haven't seen something this forceful in their careers, which spans a couple of decades more than mine. And you could almost go back and say that the last time you've seen such a comprehensive policy in the U.S., you got to go back to the Eisenhower administration in the 50s. So this is truly historic, and it's exciting. And what it ultimately concludes is the following, and I think this actually represents a number of areas for your audience to pay attention to, is that number one, the first area it focuses on is uranium mining. And it says that the US is the world's largest consumer of uranium. We need uranium for 20% of our power generation, and we don't produce any of it. It's all imported. All the uranium needed to power 98 reactors is imported. Now more than ever, especially because of COVID-19, we have a heightened sense of supply chain vulnerabilities, right? You know, whether it's uranium, masks, ventilators, you name it, there is really this growing sense of urgency that it's important to have domestic capabilities. Well, uranium is absolutely vital for energy generation, for 20% of our power, and 100% of it is imported. People then say, hold on. We're getting it from Canada. No, the Canadians had one mine operating, Cigar Lake, which just shut down recently because of COVID-19 as well. Currently, there is no uranium mining in North America. By the way, this is the first time in the history of nuclear energy that there's no uranium mining in North America.
Incredible.
The market is dominated by Russian and Chinese state-owned companies. Russia in particular, and former Soviet Union countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan used to import and provide 40% of US market. That's when the Canadians were still operating. Obviously now they are importing even more with Canadian mines shut down. The size of the market opportunity is pretty massive as well. The Department of Commerce has estimated that in the next 10 years, the size of the market to build reactors globally, because the world wants baseload clean electricity from nuclear power, that market, Frank, is $500 to $750 billion in the next 10 years. This is according to the Department of Commerce. How much of that business are US companies getting right now? Zero. What's the order book that Russia has, their state-owned company, Rosatom, to build reactors globally? It's almost $150 billion is the size of their order book to build reactors globally. Could be in Turkey, could be in Iran, could be in South Africa. So there's a tremendous global opportunity that US companies are losing out on. You know, Frank, it's not that long ago that names like Westinghouse, GE, were the ones building reactors globally. And the US led the world in uranium mining. Now you got to go back to 1980 for that. Depending on your view of time, you can say, well, that was not that long ago, or maybe it was a while ago. I don't know. But the reality is that what this report and these recommendations are set to do is to say, we got to regain all of that. And the very first one about uranium mining starts with establishing a national uranium reserve, similar to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. There's now a proposal to spend up to $1.5 billion to buy uranium for government stockpiles. In case someone is wondering about this issue as well, the US government under international treaties can't use Canadian mined uranium or Russian mined uranium for aircraft carriers and submarines. The entire nuclear navy runs on nuclear power. Nuclear navy is basically the over 100 aircraft carriers and submarines that are patrolling the waters globally at all times. They need US origin uranium based on international treaties. And so this issue of domestic capabilities, the national reserve is very, introduces another element I want to come back to on supply demand, Frank, which is interesting. In previous points in the last 15 years that I've been doing this, and even prior to that, the US government was selling uranium from government stockpiles. The Department of Energy had a barter program where they would sell anywhere between 4 to 5 million pounds per year into the market to raise funds to pay for cleanup jobs that were part of old sites that they were maintaining, reclamation projects. There was a gaseous diffusion plant in Portsmouth, Ohio, etc. So in a sense, you had that source of secondary supply in the market. What's bullish today is that as a result of this new policy position that the U.S. has, they said, we're going to start to buy uranium. We're going to set up a national uranium reserve. So now you have a new source of demand on top of what was already there in terms of utility demand. And this new source of demand it wants to come to the party with a $1.5 billion budget to buy uranium. But that same source of demand is also saying we're no longer going to sell uranium from our supplies inventories that we were doing all this time. So it really affects the supply demand from both sides. Less inventories available to the market from Department of Energy stockpiles. Department of Energy basically goes from being on the supply side to being on the bid side or the buy side. And look, there's a tremendous amount of credit, I think, that you got to give here to Trump, his administration, the Energy Secretary, the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, Dan Brouillette, Rick Perry prior to them. They get a lot of credit because they've been pushing this and recognizing this. However, it does really have bipartisan support. And it's impossible to think that if you have another administration at the end of this year, they're going to show up and say, yeah, no, we're totally fine with importing 100% of our uranium and getting it from Russia. I think the numbers and the facts are so startling. This idea that we're getting 100% all of our uranium, the fact that we don't produce any of it domestically, is so compelling that it really doesn't become an argument. And really, even up until now, we've seen bipartisan support for it, both for nuclear energy and for this idea that this is a national and energy security threat and should be addressed. And it's going to take many years to address it, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. You mentioned the administration, because in these days, if you say Trump did a good job, half the audience is going to hate you. If you say Democrats did a good job, half the audience is probably going to hate you. But this is bipartisan, and they passed this. Now, I wrote down some numbers from that recent legislation, which maybe you could help me with, because what I'm looking at is pretty amazing. Where it says the U.S. consumes 47 million pounds of uranium annually, just the U.S. And this is going to result in the U.S. now, strategic reserves, purchasing anywhere from 17 to 19 million pounds annually. I mean, are those numbers accurate? Because that amounts to 40% of the production. So that's a massive, massive number. That's a game changer. I mean, am I right on those numbers, or?
Yeah, no, those numbers are straight out of the report, and you're correct about them. Those numbers could end up being part of the $1.5 billion that I've been referring to. So one way to look at it is just the dollar amount. The other way to look at it is how many pounds will it buy. But one thing that is a bit unclear, Frank, and you've touched on it again by reading that, is there's a bit of a look back provision that the Department of Energy is going to have on this. So what they're saying is we'll reserve the right to see if whatever policy or whatever amount of buying we do now, we'll look back and see if it was enough, and we may do more. We may buy more. There may be more here as they see how the issue, basically how this gets unfolded, how it gets done, and so I think it's not going to be so black and white. I think ultimately the idea here is that you've got incredible historic recognition from the government that this is an area, an industry that is vital and it needs to be addressed. They're going to get on with it. Part of this, Frank, is going to have to be a competitive process for them to recognize who are the companies, who are the players that can competitively and reliably be supplying uranium to this program, to the National Reserve, and ultimately the amount of time it's going to take, the number of years it's going to take to see a ramp up of the industry. Remember, currently the U.S. uranium mining industry is at zero. There's no uranium mines operating. There's no production. And again, demand is at over 45 million pounds per year. So even if the DOE came in and bought 19 million pounds, 20 million pounds, those are numbers that the industry has to really ramp up to get to. So that's exciting because it's going to create thousands of jobs. It's going to create a lot of economic activity. But even if you get there, it still won't be enough to meet all the demand. Eventually you'll get there. But that's what's so exciting about this to me is this is one of those markets where you've got a massive domestic market and consumer. You've got, again, lots of room to be able to grow domestic capabilities. And Frank, I think it's politically important as well because look, right now we want to be able to create jobs in rural areas, right? And uranium mining jobs are going to be in rural areas. They're going to be in places like South Texas, Powder River Basin of Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, all the southwestern U.S. states, the western U.S. states where the uranium deposits are and where the historical operations are. I'll give you an interesting stat. You know, in 1980, when the U.S. led the world in uranium mining, was the global leader in uranium mining, there were over 20,000 jobs in the U.S. exploration uranium mining industry. And that's just direct jobs. Indirectly, in terms of labs, contractors, you name it, and the numbers would be even more than that. Over 20,000 jobs. And today, we're down to less than 400. And so you even think about the job creating machine or an engine that this can become. And it's not one that was just lost recently to COVID-19. It's one that can really become a new source because this industry has really struggled competing with state-owned companies in Russia and China over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, no, that's a great stuff. And I can tell you it's better, right? I mean, being in this industry or any industry, that it's much better on the demand side when you have massive demand and you have to create that supply compared to having tons of supply and trying to find a demand. So it's a good problem to have. And let's finish up with this because with UEC is a domestic producer. How long is it going to take you to start producing uranium? Because maybe people look at this as the overall mining industry, where, wow, if you shut off something or with gold or whatever, it takes a long time to bring back online. But how quick can you bring this production back online? And do you see, because of this seems more of a domestic thing? And maybe we can start with the first question, but I'm just curious, is this something that's going to benefit Cameco, which is in Canada, or maybe some of the other producers outside the US as much as it benefits you being in the US?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think this is positive, and it would benefit any company that has uranium projects, mines, or infrastructure, or any capability on U.S. soil or in the U.S. I mean, that's what this is about. Second, I would really say that uranium mining has come a long way in the last 10, 15 years, and the U.S. kind of has been behind on this, and it really has to do with technology, Frank. I mean, technology to mine uranium in the United States has also, is going to evolve and it's going to improve because previous focus in the U.S. was on conventional open pit and underground mines. These are higher cost mines. But we have in the U.S. something that geologically is quite advantageous. We have deposits that are sandstone hosted. And what that means, without getting technical about geology, what that means is that you can use a very low cost and environmentally friendly way of mining uranium called in situ recovery. This style of mining enjoys lower capital and operating costs. It's quite scalable. And in fact, this is the main source of production in the world today. Is in situ recovery mines are over 50% of global mining today. It's quite incredible. And it's all mainly been in Kazakhstan. In the country of Kazakhstan, they have similar style deposits as what we have in the US in places like Texas and Wyoming. And the Kazakhs, because for most of their those operations are state-owned operations, they managed to really get behind this thing. And Frank, in 1995, for example, Kazakhstan was producing 1 million pounds of uranium annually. From 1995 to today, they've ramped up from 1 million to 50 million pounds per year production. It's incredible production growth. People don't realize that's actually been the success story in the uranium mining industry, is what the Kazakhs have done, and that style of mining. And that is the lowest cost way of mining uranium. And where we have an advantage in the US is we have the same deposits. We have the same style of deposits that can be mined with the same recovery technology. We have a video animation of this on our website. So without not having enough time to get into it, I'd encourage anyone to take a look at what I'm talking about here. So what we like to talk about, and what I think is exciting, Frank, is to say, hey, if you can build low cost and environmentally friendly uranium mines using the in situ recovery method, using the same method that the Kazakhs have used to become the dominant force in uranium mining, then that is what you should focus on. That makes you a low cost supplier to the US government. Because one thing I hate is the idea that this Department of Energy thing, and we get this pushback, right? People say, oh, well, you guys are all excited about Department of Energy. Is this a bailout? Is this a bailout? Are you guys just getting a bailout? Is this like, No, it's not a bailout. Like we're talking about an industry that has basically been at dealing with predatory behavior from other state-owned companies that don't care about profit and bottom line. We're a market-based company, and even if you get a policy boost so that you can get things going, if you focus on low-cost deposits, then this isn't a bailout. This is basically about creating energy dominance. And by the way, like you know, I was recently, I've done a couple of interviews recently with Steve Bannon and on Fox Business, and you know, this is the point we talk about, is that America has energy dominance. Energy dominance has been a big part of any administration's mandate. And Frank, there's a big hole in energy dominance for America. It's nuclear energy, and it's Russia's dominance of uranium markets. So this is something that needs to be addressed. So my point is that with UEC, you have a company that's a past producer of uranium. We mine uranium. We did it with low cost that we demonstrated at our South Texas operations using in situ recovery. We've spent the last 6 years since we shut our mines down, and we've been a development stage company to build a portfolio through acquisitions and organic growth that today has a foundation of permitted projects that can produce up to 4 million pounds per year in Texas and Wyoming, and that is all using in situ recovery. And in my mind, we want to be both a competitive supplier to the Department of Energy and to U.S. utilities. And this isn't about just trying to grab some, you know, government program money. No, you got to be able to sell competitively to both sources. To sell to the Department of Energy, to the National Reserve, we've got incredible credibility. I mean, first of all, the former Energy Secretary, Spencer Abraham, is the chairman of our company. We've been in with the DOE to present our case. We were one of the few companies that were invited to also present this case that I'm making to you and to your audience, to Wilbur Ross at the Department of Commerce. We're recognized by the U.S. government as a licensed producer due to the licensed uranium processing facility we own in South Texas at Hobson. This plant is already built. This is where we can process uranium from the mines, dry it, package it, and ready for shipment and sales. So I think we're in a very unique position, but it took us 15 years to be in this position. I mean, this didn't happen overnight. We've spent 15 years of being focused on just one thing: U.S. development, U.S. assets, U.S. production, U.S. acquisitions, having a team of individuals that have been doing exactly this, uranium mining in the U.S. for their entire professional careers. All the pieces are there. We've just been through a really brutal uranium market. I mean, it's just been brutal for 9 years, where uranium prices took way longer than anyone expected to recover after the Fukushima incident in Japan. But 9 years, a lot of things can happen. And in commodity business, where it's all about supply demand, 9 years is enough time to let the market really rebalance. And I think we're seeing that. And then this issue with the U.S. really becomes a cherry on top, in my opinion, of a global market that has really sound fundamental underpinning for it, a global uranium price that's recovering. And now you get something positive in addition to that in the U.S., which I think really is great for U.S. companies like UEC that get, you know, more than one kind of driver of interest and value with what we can talk about and how we can capitalize for advancing our business.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, man, as someone who's known you through for almost, I would say, almost 10 years now. I visited the plant, the Hobson site, which you showed me. It was kind of amazing. I even held the yellow cake and stuff, which is really cool. But to see you right now, and we've talked about UEC in the past, and we had a lot of head fakes here, but to see you right now, to be honest with you, interviewing you, and someone that's known you for a long time, I've never seen you this excited, this positive, this happy on this market, and you should be, because finally it's been a long road. But and now it's not like, hey, this should happen. It's happening, right? I mean, it's a lot of things that are going on, new regulation, and it's just cool to see, because you've been in an industry that's been decimated. It's been terrible, and it's hard to operate as a CEO in industries like this, where it's just nonstop. Like, okay, how are we going to cut costs? Okay, what are we going to do to save money? Now it's, hey, we're ramping up, right? I mean, it's got to be different in terms of sentiment for you, and I could see it in your face. But I'm really happy anyway to finally see this, working out for you, and the tailwinds behind this industry.
Well, look, I appreciate that. It's exactly that, and it's not it's not just me, as you know, because when you visited our Hobson plant, you visited our office in Corpus Christi, you met the individuals that we have at UC. We those individuals, Frank, and even during this recent drop in the market in the month of March, despite the fact that uranium prices have recovered, and we've announced this, but our company took very proactive measures to reduce our operating expenditures, but make sure we don't lay anyone off, because we thought we were already down to a very bare minimum team that would give us that advantage to restart, a team that's been with the company for a very long time. So we've made a lot of difficult decisions as well along the way, but those that maintain a competitive edge for the company. I mean, okay, so we'll take major cuts, and I'll be the one that leads the way and takes the biggest cut, and we've done that. But we'll do that to ensure that our human capital base is there, because you've met those people. They're as excited as I am that you describe right now in terms of my enthusiasm. Because we're all dying for action, man. Like, we're dying to get back to work. We're dying to get back to, when I say work, I'm talking about restarting operations. We were so proud when we built Palangana in 2010, because at the time, that was the first uranium mine to come into production in the US in a decade. And then since then, Fukushima happened. And so again, there's been all these difficulties and challenges, but I don't think anyone can fault us for being patient. We've been patient. We've stuck with it. We've executed. And I think our day is coming. And again, the whole team at UEC feels the same way as I do. We're excited to show what we can do, and it's in terms of operations and results and performance and all of that. But right now, we're also playing a little bit of defense as well. Making sure operating expenses have been brought down, and maintaining a lot of discipline and financial discipline, because you got to be financially resilient. These markets have been, I don't know how you feel about the markets, but it was way down, way too fast, way up, way too fast. And even with good, strong uranium price performance, we want to make sure we're in good shape with the company. And even though the share price has recovered here from where it dropped to in March, I'm not happy about it. I mean, you look at where the stock was even a year ago, or where it was, 7 years ago, or we got a lot of ground to catch up with here. And Frank, the thing people don't realize is, before the COVID-19 sell-off in March, the broader market was at an all-time high. So it came from a base of all-time high, and it dropped, and now is recovering. Uranium was at a 9-year low, and then it went even lower, and now it's trying to recover. And so it's actually, I think, a bit frustrating if you've been in it for a long time, and if you're a holder, I think you'd know that. But it's really great to see some positive developments, because it really reinforces hope and positive energy that we're on the right track, and that inflection point is there. And funny enough, in the 15 years I've been doing this, Frank, 3 things have moved the market the most. None of them were predicted, and they're all black swan events. The flooding of Cigar Lake in 2006, Fukushima in 2011, and now with COVID-19 in 2020. And it's always like that. This is a slow-moving industry that it really feels either on the way up or down. It does need something to wake it up and get it going. And we're seeing that now. And I see a lot of similarities actually between this time and what has happened here and the 2006 market, or 2005, 2006, before we start to see the uranium bull market of 06 and 07.
No, that's great stuff. Great stuff. I'm happy for you again. You can see the excitement in Amir. And thanks so much for joining me on video. You have a nice background there, the Vancouver skyline a little bit. And I'm not going to ask you to do this on video, but I know you, whenever I see Amir, if I see him in Vancouver at conferences, the first thing he goes is, how's it going out there? I won't tell you to do it on video, but I know that you listen to the podcast. I appreciate it. And like, this setup is really good, and it's about time for you. I mean, the work that you've put in, I know you've worked harder over, and I think that builds character, Amir. Seriously, for me, being in the business for 25 years, character is built not when things are good, when things are bad. Because when things are good, everybody's okay. When things are bad, and you're still, visiting sites, you're going into Washington, talking politics, meeting the top people in the industry, and constantly where, it's even hard to talk to you. I know how busy you are. And you've done a fantastic job of that. I think people know that. So these tailwinds, I think, are going to continue. And I know UEC is well positioned. So thank you so much for joining us, Amir, and explaining everything in detail like you always do. You break it down for everyone to understand. And I know my audience especially really, really appreciates that, bud.
That's really great. Thanks, Frank. It's great to be back with you, and look forward to doing this again soon. Be well.
All right, great.